Welcome to our second webinar then. We're going to continue on the topic of discipline and dealing with discipline issues. In this series of webinars that we have on discipline, we're talking about cases that we have studied. And this case specifically will be the case of one student rather than a group of students as we had in a previous webinar. So we're going to start with the discussion of the case. So we're going to be talking about the aspects of the case and what was going on, why we decided to bring it to be the topic of one of the webinars. Then we're going to carry on to the investigation of the case. So what do we do after we have found that we actually have a case in our hands? And finally, we're going to be talking about a solution for the case, or rather, solutions, because I think that whenever we talk about case studies, we actually have to be dealing with a series of different alternatives that we have to make use of in order to deal with what is going on in our classroom, right? Loading. No. It's not going to be about the same group. Actually, as I was saying, last week we were talking about a group, and this week we're going to be focusing on one student. And in fact, I like to call this case the case of that one student. I think we've all had the student that was the troublemaker, or was seen as that student that we sometimes just can't figure out what to do to handle with that student, and that's why we decided to focus on this topic this week. Well, let's carry on to the discussion then. So he was a T3 student. He was an 11 or 12-year-old. I'm not going to use his real name here, but I'm going to be calling him Bruno, okay? It was the first time studying with us, so it was a group that had just been formed in one of our partners in Cultura Inglesa, and he had never had any sort of experience studying at Cultura Inglesa before. It was a group with 12 students. It was comprised of boys and girls, but after a while, as things started to get worse in relation to discipline, we had many girls who had just decided to transfer to a different group, and that was complicated because of course we were lucky that we had two T3 groups happening at the same time, and therefore girls could actually transfer to the other group. But if we didn't, then we might have had some trouble with the fact that boys were sort of kicking girls away or scaring girls away from this one group. In fact, I ended up having only 6 students in this group at the end of the term, and that was kind of scary as well. So what were the issues that happened in class that involved this one student, Bruno? So he was, of course, always disrupting the lessons. So he would talk to other students. He would use Portuguese all the time to talk. Even when talking to me, we often see that sometimes students will talk in Portuguese to each other, but they will talk in English when they talk to the teacher. But this is not the case with him. He would just refuse to use English when he was speaking, and that was actually a problem because well, they're expected to be using English all the time, not only when talking to us, right, or when performing a task. He would often be late, so even though he would leave school at around, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes before our lesson started in the same building, he would often be late, even though other people who even studied with him in the same classroom were also were not late. So this was something that caught my attention. And finally, I think one of the issue that was most important here to tackle is that he sometimes would hurt and offend others. So he would make jokes that were extremely inappropriate, and he would often play in a way that would involve either punching his classmates or slapping them, or sometimes pushing them, and that became a very serious case that we had to deal with. Just before we move on, Gustavo, I would like to invite you, since you're the only one participating so far. Would you like to turn your microphone on, and then maybe we could actually have a chat rather than be me speaking and you typing? How do you feel comfortable to do that? Okay, okay. Then I'm going to here. I'm going to ask you. Then you can click on unmute, or maybe there we go. I think I can do that from here. Okay, to try saying something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can. Yes, absolutely. Okay, I can hear you clearly. Great. So I'm going to ask you the first question then. If this was the case with you, if you had this student in your group, what do you think you would try to do? What would be the steps that you would take to deal with it?
Oh, well, I guess I would try talking to him like at the end of the lesson, or maybe during the lesson if it was very serious, then I would try to communicate with the parents, see if there's any improvement. Um, I don't know. In fact, I've had groups with discipline issues too, so that's why I've been participating in these webinars. So I would like to have some ideas, better
I
ideas.
see. I see. No, I think your ideas they're valid. I mean, in fact, I think it would be the first thing that I would think of doing as well, and I think that's important that we understand that yes, this is exactly what I think should be done. It's really the I think the expected action that we should take, right? We're gonna move on the discussion here to what actually didn't work. We would, as you said, I think that the first actions that you mentioned, they were exactly what I tried to do. So I asked him to stay quiet, and I would often call his attention during the lessons, and sometimes I had to tell him off and go like, Bruno, that's not okay. This is not what we should be doing, and this is not what is expected of you. And yeah, it got to the point of me having to call parents. And I think what was interesting is that, as you mentioned, these are the three actions that we all resort to, and I think that they tend to be very effective initially, and sometimes, of course, they might not work. But I think that they are the first initial steps that we have to take. Two of the things, however, that I think were very interesting about calling his parents was I didn't call parents to just say, look, this has been happening, and I've tried everything, so you have to do something at home and talk to him at home so we will solve this problem, I think two of the things that we have to question parents when we call them sometimes is what's being happening. I think we sometimes have to investigate what is actually going on outside the classroom. So is everything going okay with him? Is something happening in the family? Is there any trouble that he's been going through, or even at school? Is there some sort of problem that he has been having at school regarding his performance or friends or teachers? And then I think another very important question that we have to ask is the same thing, the same behavior issues happening at school? Because sometimes we tend to think that, oh, he's like this everywhere, and he might not be the case. Maybe at school he has a completely different behavior, and then it's really related to what we are doing in our lessons. But it could be the case that it's the same at school, and then it's actually something related to the attitude of the student. So I think it's very important that we first define that. Does that make sense?
Yes, and from experience, oftentimes just talking to the student or talking to the parents, I think it doesn't result in a long-term solution, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they improve a little in the next few lessons, but then it starts happening again. So I think it might be something deeper, as you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes I think that investigating can sort of help us relax a little bit in relation to the situation itself. Because if I know that, for example, the student's parents are going through a divorce or the family is going through a very hard time, it might be comprehensible that he's behaving in a certain way. For example, because he needs some sort of attention, and this is how he found out he would get it, right? Um, but I think then we're moving on to the next step of what we have to do. I think it's investigating, right? So you get a picture of the case and then, okay, let's find out. But I'd like to throw another question to you. I mean, why do you think we should investigate?
Why? Now
Mm-hmm.
investigate.
Mm-hmm.
Why we should
Why should we?
investigate?
Why? Yeah. I mean, why should we look into what's going on?
Well, I guess it gives you more knowledge about on what to do because if you only talk to the students or talk to the parents, you're merely focusing on the result, and by investigating, you may grasp something about the causes as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I think you nailed it. I think it's exactly that. I think we have to go a little bit deeper and not only look at the, and I of course between quotes like uh, not only look at the symptoms, but look at the root of the problem. So what is actually causing the student to behave like that? And sometimes we might not find out, and I think it's okay if we don't. We have to try. Well, we can try, but sometimes we might not find out. Um, and how can we investigate? Can you think of some ways in which we can uh, find out things about students in general, not only this specific case?
Well, there was a step of talking to the parents, as you said, but I think we
Mhm.
can also have a certain types of activity in class in which students ask each other about their routine or ask each other or talk about it or when they're personalizing content, and then you may get certain hints on what's been going on, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any other ideas?
I don't know. Maybe by asking them to write about something in their lives in a composition.
Okay. Yes. And I think I hadn't thought of something like that. I think designing activities in our lessons that will help us get some insights on what's going on and how students feel about certain things. I think that's actually very interesting, and it's sort of disguised, right? It might help in
Yes.
the way that, yeah, yeah, it might help in the way that they're they might be less likely um, to 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 feel reluctant to share something because they're talking to peers, not to us, not to parents. Um,
Well, the
and
thing
maybe.
is, if
Mhm.
the issue is discipline, perhaps this certain student might not be cooperative, so it might not work. But
Mhm.
I think it's a resource, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, and but I think that it sort of diminishes the pressure as well because I'm just writing your suggestion here to have it on the chat if we have to go back to it. I think it also helps in the sense of diminishing the pressure. If you think about it like this, so you call parents and then you say, "Can you please talk to him and investigate and find out if something is going on?" Maybe the fact the parents decide to talk to him about it, and depending on how parents decide to talk to him about it, it might cause the idea that, oh my God, so So something's going wrong, and the teacher told my parents, and he shouldn't have, this kind of attitude.
Yes,
So perhaps designing activities can help a lot. And here are some of the ways that I thought we could also investigate not only this case but all cases. So we can check easy. I think looking at the system and looking at what other teachers have registered there, and looking at data such as does this student show good performance overall, and is he or she the kind of student who is absent very often in other courses, or has it just been happening in my case, and of course, have parents been contacted many times, because sometimes we contact them and then um, we add to the system, like, okay, I contacted them and I contacted them and I contacted them, and again and again and again it keeps appearing. So you can check if that's been going on for a while. You can even check when it started. So, so from T1 to T4 the student was doing fine, and in T5 I can see many different calls to parents, so something happened here. As you mentioned, we can talk to parents, we can talk to previous teachers, and one thing I think that is very important is that um, we keep it very objective. Sometimes we're going to talk to teachers and we're going to hear things such as, this student, I tried everything, nothing works with him, and oh my God, yeah, you're teaching this student, I'm so sorry, because they probably had an experience that wasn't very pleasant. And we need to be careful not to remember the first webinar, not to fall into the trap of first impressions. And sometimes this first impression might come from previous teachers, and this can be a problem for us. As you mentioned, designing tasks. Well, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going on that note, like oftentimes we see, we witness teachers in the staff room complaining about attitude and how it makes them feel, and how the student is not doing what is expected to be done, and not focusing on the actions itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes we might be focusing too much on the problem rather than on the solutions we could be looking at, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned designing tasks, and I think observing the student during lessons is really important as well. Like realizing what makes this student happy. And I think we don't think about it very often. What makes my student individually happy? When is he or she most engaged? Or when is he or she not engaged at all? And sort of collect this data so that we can use it when dealing with a situation. And of course, talking to him individually. And I think that actually hearing the student can be very helpful. So treating this person, this student in front of us, as an individual who has feelings and emotions, and who is going through a lot of pressure at school and sometimes at home as well. This is really important to take into account. I don't know if you agree with me, Gustavo. Do you feel that sometimes we tend to disregard students' problems? Like they'll come to us and say like, oh, but I have so much to do at school, and sometimes our reaction is like, oh, come on, you're a student, you're a teenager, you don't know what real stress is and what real pressure. Do you feel that sometimes we do that, or is it just my impression?
No, I agree with you. Like, we tend to unconsciously compare their lives to our own, and we think that we do too much, and sometimes you are very immersed on what you have to do, what you have planned for the lesson, and you
Mhm.
kind of disregard these types of, I was gonna say interruption, but it's not an interruption, right?
Mhm.
This kind of participation, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we would have to investigate that a little bit more deeply. But I think that sometimes we tend to forget that at this age, um, not having new clothes to go to a party, it might be a really stressful thing, right? Um, but okay. Yeah, yeah. But moving on from investigating then to sort of like solutions of what we can do. And I think I wrote solutions here on purpose, with a very clear purpose. That is, um, I think it's questionable whether we can actually find solutions for cases like this, because I'm not sure if we're actually talking about a problem, and if it's not a problem, then it shouldn't really be, we shouldn't be looking at it as if it could be solved. I think we're looking at ways to dealing with a human being, with an individual who just might have different needs, and who has different opinions, and who's having an attitude that is just not expected from us. Um, and maybe I think that we can start looking at things in a different way, based on this notion that, okay, perhaps this is not a problem. This is just a situation that I have to deal with, and as any other situation, you have to use different approaches to deal with it. And then I think when we think about these approaches, when we think about these so-called solutions, we need to also understand that they might not be forever, because again, you're not fixing something, because it's not broken and it's not a problem. But whatever you try and that is successful, it might be just temporary. And I think it's okay to accept that it might be temporary. So you try something 1 week and it is successful, and after the second or third week, it starts not working anymore. And then we get frustrated again. And I think we have to understand that sometimes you're going to try something and it's going to be successful for a short period of time. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means that it works for a certain period of time. And that we have to work out a different solution after a while, because maybe the student got used to it, or maybe it's becoming too predictable. Another thing that I think is extremely important that we do is we need to acknowledge and accept the sort of contribution that this student is making. So actually understanding that that student might have something interesting to say, because of course he would be interrupting what I had planned for my lesson, but sometimes he would actually interrupt me to say something that was relevant and that actually made sense within the context of the lesson. Maybe it wasn't the best moment for him to be contributing like that, but I think acknowledging his contribution and understanding that, okay, maybe he's going to make these kind of contributions from time to time that are disruptive, but we have to accept. And sometimes we need to understand that at this level of development, and I mean really the development of their brains, we might have to deal with this kind of thing, and it's okay. It's really okay. We just have to align our expectations. So, am I expecting this student to act like this? Is he actually going to act like this? If the answer is no to the second question, then what's wrong is our expectation, not the way the student is acting or behaving. Of course, I think the third one that I'm going to show is kind of, should be kind of obvious, but I think we sometimes take it for granted. That is building stronger rapport. And when I mean building stronger rapport, I'm not talking about knowing the student's name and just being polite, because we can know people's name and be polite to them and not have any sort of rapport. I think that we need to understand that building rapport has to do with understanding what we can do to make this student feel valued, what we can do to make this student feel like they belong in the group, and like feel like we actually care about them, and that like we actually pay attention to what they're doing. And I think going back to the previous step can be very profitable in that sense. Sometimes they'll make contributions in Portuguese, and they'll make contributions that have nothing to do with the lesson, but instead of going, oh, please don't say anything, please not now, or Gustavo, again, please be quiet, or I'm sorry, I said Gustavo, but I had Bruno in mind. Bruno, again.
It's okay.
I think we can sort of change the way we react to these things, and we can go like, oh, that's very interesting, can you tell me about it later? Instead of not now. Or, oh, cool, can you say that in English? Instead of, in English, please. And I think this helps build rapport in the sense of showing them that we understand what's going on there, and that they feel so anxious that they have to say something, or that they have to stand up and do whatever it is that they do, you know. Um, and I think also taking things a little bit more lightly. So understanding that it's okay to laugh at certain things that happen in the classroom, and that we can, you know, we can work things out, even though it takes a while to take care of the fire that might be lit up. Sometimes just laughing and going like, ah, okay, that's funny. Now sit down and focus, because you've had your fun, but now we actually have to do some work here. So let's get to work, you know. Of course, these three, they don't help much when it comes to the fact that he was hurting and offending others, for example. But I think that this here might help a little bit, making sure that he understands that what he's been doing is not okay is extremely important. He's not, you see, he's not going to react very well to us telling him that he has to behave himself if we don't build stronger rapport. But we can make daily agreements. So every single day in the beginning of the lesson, rather than in the end of the lesson, talking to him and saying, look, today I'm expecting you to do this and this and this. And today, your peers are going to be expecting you to act like this, you know. And this can help a little bit, because in the beginning of every lesson, being reminded of what he's expected to do sort of might help him build this sense of responsibility that he has to, that there are expectations in relation to what he'll be doing, you know. We can also sometimes, if it's the case of a student who actually needs a little bit more attention, and who needs a little bit more of us close to them, I think we can put him in the spotlight in the sense of, okay, so you're going to be my helper today. You're going to be the one who's going to help me handing reusable sets. This might give him something to do that makes him feel like it's meaningful, and he's part of the lesson, you know. And then this brings us to assigning him and the group some responsibilities. So giving them something to do, giving them a task that is connected to their attitude and to their behavior, for example. The idea of the cards that we mentioned in the previous webinar, that is assigning students and groups responsibilities. And I think that these can come in a variety of ways. So it can be, you, Joãozinho, you're going to be responsible for not letting anyone speak Portuguese today. And you, Bruno, you're going to be responsible for when somebody stands up, you're the one who has to tell them to sit down. And once we assign them certain responsibilities, we can also negotiate in the sense of, so you're responsible for not letting people stand up. Can you stand up? No, because you have to be the model. Because if you stand up and then you tell other people not to stand up, will they respect you? You know, so you sort of raise this awareness that in order to be responsible for something, they also have to be responsible for their own actions. And finally, it's really important to align actions with parents. So yes, we're going to have to talk to parents sometimes to let them know that their son or daughter is behaving in a certain way in class. But we also have to provide parents with sort of ideas that they can use in their house, so that they help us, you know. And not only in the sense of, please talk to your son, he's just acting like this and like that. Being more assertive in the sense of, look, he's been doing this, and this is my action plan, so I've been doing this in class, and I think that if you start doing this at home, this is going to help me a lot. And something very clear, like, I don't know, let's say the student hasn't been doing their homework, so negotiating with parents. When is a good time for you, parent, to sit with your child and do homework together? Do you have this sort of time? Because if you don't, we're going to work out a different solution. But if you do, then I suggest we start, I don't know, having daily meetings, you and your son, you and your daughter, in which you're going to be doing homework together. And then it's a commitment that the parent also has to stick to, of course. So these are some of the ideas that we can use in order to deal with that one student, and I think it's really important that we bear in mind that at the same time we're taking actions to deal with one student, we're also taking actions to deal with a variety of students. And we're going to have 20, 21, 25, if you're talking about entry students in one classroom. And sometimes we might not be able to have this kind of thorough work with all of them, but it's important that we tackle these most urgent matters, the matters that have been actually being a trouble, some sort of trouble to the lessons that we're teaching, and of course to the learning that the students should be having. Does that make sense, Gustavo? I mean, would you like to comment on any of these suggestions?
No, I mean, I quite agree with that. I was gonna ask you about the case you were commenting earlier.
Mhm.
If it's a real case, how old was the boy?
He was 11 or 12. He was a T3 student.
Okay.
In this case, there was even a situation that was a horrible, very inappropriate, and very uncomfortable situation. He was blonde, and he's white with green or blue eyes. I can't recall right now. And he one day just decided he would imitate Hitler, and that was very complicated
Oh,
because it's attitude, and it's something very serious. And of course, at that moment, I think talking to him immediately was the best solution. So just going like, Bruno, that's not okay. You can't do this, and it's not the kind of thing you should do in any sort of situation. And just sit down with him and actually have a talk about how he should be more responsible with his actions and the seriousness of what he was doing. So
of
yeah,
course.
it was a difficult case, but I think taking some of these steps helped me. Was it a solution? No. I
Yes,
still had
and
a hard time.
in moments like that, there are other students who might find it funny, and then things go
Yes,
out of control, and we never
yes,
know about their families' backgrounds. So
absolutely.
I thought you did the right thing, and I think about all of that you have been saying is that the difficult part is keeping self-control and I mean, having all these attitudes as your second nature, because sometimes we get overwhelmed with stress and indiscipline, and we're pressed for time and things like that. But it all makes sense. We have to be like Zen masters, and
And
remember all
again,
that.
it's okay. It's okay to feel stressed, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. I think we've all been there. But the key aspect, as you mentioned, is we are the emotionally intelligent beings in the classroom. We are the adults. We are the ones who have our prefrontal cortex fully developed. So we have to act accordingly. And sometimes we might get carried away because of stress and because we feel personally annoyed with something. And I think we need to take a step back and look at it from a very professional perspective. And remember, of course, can't teenagers have bad days? I mean, we have bad days. We have days in which we just don't want to talk to anyone, and we just don't want to, go through any annoyance because we're gonna feel stressed, and we might react in an angry manner. Don't students get to have days like that as well? I think they do, and we should remind ourselves of that.
For
I
sure,
think
yes.
we've done the following step that I was going to suggest, which was revisiting the case. So looking at the aspects that made me bring this specific case to the table. That is, a student who will often disrupt the lesson and use Portuguese and be late very often and hurt and sometimes offend others. And also in this case with him, he was the one who would light up the classroom oftentimes. So how can we deal with this specific student? And I think we've covered a few ideas. As we mentioned, the idea here would be to have a discussion of the case and then learn how we can investigate it. And rather than talking about a solution, talk about solutions, so different ways that we can approach the situation. Do you have any question or anything that you would like to comment on, Gustavo?
I don't think so. I think we're all right.
Okay, okay then. Then thank you very much for your participation. Thanks for your contributions as well. I think they were very, very relevant, and we had a very profitable discussion. You can always rewatch this webinar with a special participation from Gustavo also.
Okay.
And keep up. Next week, we're going to be talking about different cases, and we're going to be covering differentiating in Cultura in groups. So thank you very much. I expect to see you there.
Okay, thank you, Juan. See you then.
See you. Bye bye, Gustavo.
Bye bye.